Okay, we're going to get started here. Firstly, my name's Hayden Gordine. I'm the head of the Taylor Root business in Australia. Also on the webinar, we have Sean Murphy, who's based at our Melbourne office. Both Sean and I are New Zealanders. We're both ex-New Zealand qualified lawyers. We both practice in New Zealand. Sean's been based in Australia for a number of years now and is one of our specialists at moving lawyers particularly from New Zealand into Australia, but also from New Zealand into the UK and our international markets. I've worked with Taylor Root for about 15 years. I've had sort of the luck of working in our London, our Singapore, our Hong Kong, and also our Sydney office now. So we're both based in Australia. Having worked in these international markets and lived overseas for so many years, I have a good understanding of working and living internationally. But most importantly, I've actually sat in your very shoes. I was a lawyer at Mattelli in Auckland many years ago and embarked on my OE after a very similar presentation from Taylor Root in Auckland. The OE has changed a little since my day, but back then I packed up my brand new Kathmandu backpack that I got for Christmas and traveled around Australia for a month, followed by a couple of months in Southeast Asia through Thailand, Vietnam, before landing in London. I delivered furniture for 5 weeks before I secured a job at a top secret law firm called Charles Russell Speechley. At Mattelli I was very much a corporate and commercial lawyer. I did some lease work in the morning, some acquisitions in the afternoon, but I secured my first job in London. I was very much a big city corporate lawyer focusing on mergers and acquisitions. After a time at Charles Russell Speechley, I joined a US law firm as a private equity lawyer. As a 3-year PQE lawyer in London, I was making more money than I could ever imagine. It was pretty good there. I had big plans of moving back to Napier, where I'm originally from. I was going to sort of practice there, but I've been away from New Zealand now 17 years, probably 18 years. I still haven't made it back to Hawke's Bay, although that's very much on the cards one day. One of the biggest issues with your OE is a complete lack of certainty. COVID, closed borders really hasn't helped, the certainty issue. And what I'm talking about is more moving overseas without a job. Even if you've got a job, you're moving to the other side of the world. You may not have a flat. You may be without friends. And obviously, for most of us, family is a long way away. Unfortunately, there are many unknowns with the move overseas, but we do hope today we can assist with some clarity about your overseas options. For many of you, just like me, that OE dream is to travel and work in London, but London isn't the only option for New Zealand lawyers now, so we'll cover off some of these in today's seminar. Just in terms of an itinerary, we will cover off London and Australia in great detail because they tend to be the places where most Kiwi lawyers go. We'll also cover off the offshore market, the Middle East, the Asian markets in particular, Singapore and Hong Kong, and also lastly, quickly on the US. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please put them in the Q&A box and I will answer them at the end. I'm just going to share my screen so you've got something to look at rather than my face the whole way through. So give me a second. I was having a few issues with this earlier today. Just a little bit about Taylor Root first. I appreciate we're not in the New Zealand market, so you probably haven't seen us that often. We're UK established 1989, so we've been working the recruitment market for well over 30 years. We focus on law firms, which is probably what most of you will be looking for in the UK, but we also place lawyers in the financial sector, the corporate and commercial and also professional services sectors as well. We kind of like to see ourselves as local experts with global reach, physically present in all major legal markets. We really are legal specialists. You're talking to 2 ex-practicing lawyers that now do legal recruitment. So we feel like we know what we're talking about from that perspective. In terms of our offices, we've got 13 offices around the world, throughout the UK and Ireland. London, Dublin are particularly two very big ones for UK, New Zealand lawyers. Throughout Europe as well, we often place lawyers. Amsterdam is a great place for competition lawyers. Then out through the Middle East, Asia, and then obviously closer to home in terms of Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane, we have offices, and also we cover the Perth market. Before we talk about locations, I really want to cover off the demand for New Zealand lawyers. It's not all doom and gloom in the world. There's still a lot of opportunities out there. I am sorry to say that it's not 2021 and 2022. They were boom years for Kiwi lawyers going overseas in terms of the multiple offers that you could get and at a younger PQE age. That was almost like a 10, 15-year boom. I would have said it, I think probably 2003, 4 was a similar market. And then you've got to wait sort of another 15, 16 years before what happened last year. It is a different story, but it's more a return to normality. So don't let this put you off your overseas dream. There's certainly options there for you. Internationally, they like Kiwi lawyers for 3 reasons. We are very well trained. We work hard. And lastly, probably most importantly, we actually return home. Law firms will get the best out of you for 2 to 5 years. And just when they're starting to talk to you about partnership, training and developing you into the partnership track and investing more money in you, you pack up your bags and move home. In all honesty, they know this when they employ you, and it's a win-win for all parties because they can focus on the UK lawyers in terms of pushing them through to partnership. That is essentially why there are so many jobs for Kiwi and also Australian lawyers, because we come in, you work really hard at an associate level, senior associate level, and then most of us will head home. One of the biggest uncertainties of going overseas really is securing a job. I know many of you work for some of the recognized firms in New Zealand, the Bell Gullies, the Buttle Finlays, the Russell McVeighs, and there's a very good chance that you will secure a role before you go. What I would say is most employees now, though, are looking to do a face-to-face interview when you're on the ground there. And I'd say about 70 to 80% of all New Zealand lawyers will actually depart New Zealand without a job, but secure a job within the first few weeks of landing. Hopefully, we've got a number of interviews arranged. If I rewind back to my case, I had my CV out with Taylor Root and had 3 or 4 interviews in my first week in landing in London. It took me about a month to get a job, hence the reason I was delivering furniture. But I was very much in that process when I was traveling around Southeast Asia. If you're lucky enough to work for one of those firms and you secure a position before departing, the firm will also pay your flights, they'll arrange your visa, you'll normally get your first month's accommodation paid for, and in some cases, a sign-on bonus. In terms of practice groups, as you'll see here, the transactional lawyers are the most in demand. They're lawyers that look at corporate, banking, capital markets, construction. If you're a New Zealand lawyer and practice corporate or banking in particular, there's a really good chance you'll get a role before you head over. Demand is also good for the moment in other areas, IP, IT, employment, construction in particular in Australia. The front end and back end construction is big here at the moment. Real estate, look, it really was booming. It's a bit more steady at the moment, hopefully a little bit of pickup later this year. I've said the least in demand in terms of litigation and dispute resolution. We've traditionally really struggled with lawyers with commercial litigation experience. Generally speaking, the contentious lawyers in New Zealand sort of lack international arbitration experience, which is quite important internationally. And there's just an oversupply of contentious lawyers in most markets, even in Australia, with the exception of construction. If you are in New Zealand, you have some arbitration experience, it'll go a long way in terms of helping us secure your role. Also, maybe that specialized litigation experience of banking litigation, construction litigation, or perhaps IT, IP kind of litigation. We've definitely helped litigators secure jobs from those. If you are a litigator, don't worry, you can still move overseas. You just might need to be a little bit more flexible. London is still the best place for litigation lawyers. You just might need to arrive there and take on a contract role for 6 months. For instance, there's a huge contract market in London. You may consider taking a role at the regulator to get some sort of regulatory experience before seeking that permanent position. Alternatively, the other great market for litigators is the Cayman Islands or the offshore market. I appreciate most of you on this call want to discuss or hear a lot about London, but I want to quickly cover off the Australian market. Just actually reminding back on that demand side, I can't see your question moment, but I'm sure there'll be some questions about other practice areas, which I'll cover off if that's your question at the end. I can give you a little bit more information about those practice areas. But I just really want to quickly cover off Australia. When most Kiwis think of Australia, we normally think of going to London first, then coming back to Sydney and Melbourne for a couple of years before returning home. We like it here because the salaries are better than New Zealand. The work is more aligned to London, and it's a good transitional period back home. Recently, however, and this is mostly due to COVID, we've seen more and more New Zealanders come to Australia long term rather than moving to London, also as an alternative in terms of gaining experience as a transitional period to London. You need around 2 to 3 years, ideally, to move to London because of the reduction in PQE, and we'll cover that later. In Australia, you really only need sort of 9 to 12 months experience to secure a job. So it's good to come here to Australia for a couple of years and move on to London at the same time as your colleagues from New Zealand. It's especially good if you're trying to enhance your resume. Not only are Australia, there's more international firms here, which are more internationally recognized, but the transactions are bigger, they're more complex, they're more sophisticated, and therefore it's going to help you secure a role internationally in years to come. You can't also sort of forget the lifestyle in Australia, the sun and surf of Sydney. Look, quite frankly, it's utterly amazing. The cafes and events culture in Melbourne is second to none. Both cities are amazing to work and live in. Your salaries will be considerably higher than what you'd be getting in New Zealand, and the work is second to none. The other thing that hopefully you may or may not know about Australia is that you don't need a working visa to come here. We have full working rights as New Zealand citizens, so you can literally just arrive at the airport and start working the next day. As I mentioned earlier, you kind of need about 12 months experience in New Zealand before you can start exploring options here. But if you've got sort of 9 to 12 months, we can start talking to you about options in terms of coming in sort of 3 to 6 months' time. The Australian law firm market is divided into 3 categories. We have the top tier market, the mid-tier market, and international firms, and we have the boutiques. The top tier markets, you've probably heard of firms like Allens and Ashurst and Clayton Utz and Coors and Gilbert and Tobin. The mid-tier markets, we have Landers and Rogers, Mills Oakley, Holden Redlich, ABL. You also have a lot of the international firms here, the Eller and Overys, the Clifford Chance, the DLA Pipers, the Jones Day, and the Cowell Gates. We also have a really vibrant boutique firm market here. If you're looking to come here long term or get that specialized skill set, they tend to focus on like construction law, front end and back, or class actions. And these boutique firms, you can actually earn as much as you can in a top tier law firm, and you're working with top tier lawyers. To give you an example of some of the salaries that are on offer here, and these are all in New Zealand dollars. As you can see, they're fairly good. If you're a 2-year PQE lawyer in New Zealand, you could probably earn somewhere between 90 to probably about 150,000 by moving to a middle top tier law firm here in Australia. Generally speaking, pretty much all the Kiwis are moving here are joining the mid tier or the top tier. So it's probably a good uplift on what you're earning in New Zealand. That only significantly increases if you're a 3 to 4 year PQE and you're sort of heading towards that senior associate sort of mark. It's good money compared to even the top tiers in New Zealand. As for demand in Australia, we have jobs across all sectors, but as per most markets, we have less demand in litigation unless it's contentious back end construction. Although we have excellent demand in front end construction, corporate capital markets, banking and finance. Although look, we placed an employment lawyer here only last week from New Zealand. So it's a great market across most practice areas. Now we're going to sort of move on to London. look, you can walk into any law firm in London, you can walk into any pub in London, and I guarantee you there'll be a Kiwi there. Traveling and working in the UK has been a rite of passage for us for generations. The big OE is, as we like to call it, there's great historical ties, and with the UK, there's no language barriers. It's a similar legal system. And Europe's on your doorstep. The UK is just a natural fit for us Kiwi lawyers looking to work abroad and accelerate our careers. There are so many great reasons why you want to move to the UK. For me, one of the most enjoyable and I lived in London for 6 years, was really the travel throughout Europe. I went to watch All Black tests in Ireland, Scotland, France. I went to Ibiza to party. I did boat trips around Greece and Croatia. You see destinations like the Eiffel Tower. I backpacked around Egypt and saw the Nile and the pyramids. It's amazing. I saw it. I loved it. And it's a big part of why most of us head over there as well. Then you have London itself. It has everything you can imagine. Big Ben, Buckingham Palace, King Charles III, the West End, the pubs are a big part of it, the history, the clubs, the parks. The parks are an interesting one for Kiwi lawyers. It takes you a while to get used to it, to be honest, coming from the New Zealand summer. It's the best way to describe the park is it's where they go like a beach. So, everyone's in there, sunbathing in their board shorts and bikinis, and there's just no water in sight. So that's definitely a new experience for most of us when we get there. Look, it's cold in winter in the UK. But it's really, really well catered for. I still remember my days as a Scarfie in Dunedin and just how freezing I was in those flats. I've never been so cold in my life, and you compare that to how London is in terms of their central heating. It's just the way they live, and it's very warm and comfortable. Summer has its ups and downs. Some days are hot. It's light to 10:30 p.m. at night, which is a huge highlight. And then you've got to remember you're only an hour away from the Mediterranean, and with Ryanair and JetEasy, it's easy to get across to those destinations. So now onto this market. What I would like to talk a lot about is post-qualification experience, or PQE. The UK lawyers complete a 2-year training contract before qualifying as a lawyer. During that training contract, they will complete 4 seats of 6 months each, and one of those are a contentious seat. At the end of those 2 years, they are offered a qualified position in a practice group, which is known as being newly qualified, or an NQ position. Because New Zealand lawyers don't complete training contracts, although I know a lot of you do sort of a year's training, we are traditionally discounted 2 years PQE. So if you have 2 years in experience in New Zealand, you're often competing with the NQ market in London. If you have 4 years experience in New Zealand, you're mostly considered a 2-year PQE lawyer in London. Look, in some instances, and in some cases when you become more senior, that discounting does move, and you might be discounted 1.5 years or even a year. Often there's a realignment after you've been working there. What I would say is listen to the law firm. They will evaluate you versus their cohort, and they'll put you in the position and the level that they think is appropriate. And the last thing you want to do is move to London and to be expected to be transacting as a 2 to 3 year PQE lawyer, even though you've got 4 to 5 years. There's a lot of pressure there, and it's best to take the PQE that they have on offer. The UK market is made up of a broad range of firms. This goes from US firms to the global elite. And they're generally catalyzed as the US elite, the Magic Circle, the Silver Circle, International, West End, Boutique, and Regional. To manage your expectations, the US elite are really only seeking lawyers from the top-ranked New Zealand law firms, and mostly in corporate and banking, and some funds, I should say. The compensation from a US law firm is outstanding. I like to use the example of one we did at the end of last year. He was a banking lawyer from Wellington. I think it was about 70,000 New Zealand dollars. And we got him about 160,000 pounds in London, which is around 330,000 New Zealand dollars. If you're lucky enough to have that skill set, that firm and that experience, the UK market really is your oyster in terms of opportunity. US practices now form a large part of the London elite. They've gone through substantial growth over the last 15 years. They've secured heavyweight partners from the Magic Circle and have grown their UK practices and become some of the UK's biggest firms. Now, they all tend to be corporate law firms, hence the recruitment of only transactional lawyers. They have large corporate capital markets, finance, and restructuring practices, but they don't tend to have these support departments like employment or IT, for instance. US firms pay very well. It can be life-changing money, but the trade-off is extremely long hours. Things like 3,000 billable hours plus weekend work. Generally speaking, they're not known for their lack of training and support. Although, look, some of the US firms like Latham & Watkins and Skadden are now getting big enough now that they do have that structure in place. The culture of US firms isn't for everyone, but if you want to work with the best deals with the best lawyers in London, then you want to work for a US law firm, even for a couple of years. The Magic Circle, these are the famous law firms in London. When I went there, it was all about the Magic Circle, the UK corporate elite firms. What sets these law firms apart from the rest of the UK market is they're big, they're all based in London, and they have sizable international practices. That each of them would take on at least 100 trainees and new NQs every year. They've got a reputation for working lawyers hard and demanding a lot of them. They also tend to be focused on corporate and finance. These departments stand at really the heart of these firms, but they do have teams like employment, tax, IP, IT that often play a very supported advisory role in facilitating these transactions. And a big bulk of their litigation work is finance in nature too. We've moved a number of tax lawyers, for instance, to the Magic Circle law firms last year. When it comes to US versus Magic Circle, the number one difference is money. In New Zealand dollars terms, the difference for a 3-year PQE lawyer obtaining a 1-year PQE lawyer in London can be as much as $100,000. You are likely to work the same long hours, so why not work for that extra 100,000 New Zealand dollars? This is very much a present debate in London. You'll hear a lot about it from the lawyers when you're there. Here's a slide of some of the salaries on offer, again, all in New Zealand dollars. Some of the reasons why you may not want to go for the salary temptation, they're probably, in all honesty, slightly longer hours than the Magic Circle. They've got huge billable targets. The always on expectation, more demanding, unrelenting partners, often a lack of formal training. Look, another big one is the very heavy emphasis on funds and private equity work as opposed to sort of listed private client work, which you get at the Magic Circle. And that aligns a little bit more to your return to New Zealand. Some people prefer to be, part of a London headquarter firm as opposed to an outpost of a US headquarter firm. The money, though, is undeniably the major driving force to move to a US law firm. From my perspective as a Kiwi lawyer who worked for a US law firm, I think the hardest thing for me was really the always on expectation, canceling holidays to Europe at the last minute when all my mates are at the airport boarding a flight and you're doing an all-nighter and staying the weekends. I think I worked every Sunday pretty much for 6 months. So, there is a trade-off in terms of your lifestyle and what comes down to what you want to get out of your 2 to 5 years or 10 years in London from that perspective. Under the Magic Circle, you have the Silver Circle. The top Silver Circle firms are Ashurst, Herbert Smith, Hogan Lovells, and Norton Rose. You also then have the sort of city law firms that are CMS, Simmons, Taylor Weston, Clyde & Co. We also now have the international law firms that were perhaps UK firms like DLA Piper, for instance, is a good one. You also have the top 50 UK law firms. Stevenson Harwood, Charles Russell Speechley is one that, where I joined when I got to London. What I should make clear is that every law firm in the top 50 is bigger than any law firm in New Zealand. So you're not exactly joining a small law firm. You've got to take, say, Hill Dickinson at number 49, who's 175 partners, 840 staff in London. I think the combined offices of Balgully across Auckland and Wellington are 250 lawyers, 400 staff. So it's pretty much, they've got that in partners, let alone that in associates. So the huge law firms. Traditionally, the Silver Circle and the city law firms and those international law firms, the top 50, are where we place most New Zealand lawyers. It's a good blend of competitive salaries. It's got a bit of a better work-life balance. They're also full-service law firms, so they do have litigation departments. They'll have construction practices, TMT practices, employment practices, and contentious and non-contentious for a lot of those practices. They tend to also be a little bit more social. They'll have Friday night drinks. They'll have sports club and social teams. They're also full of people that can actually attend them because they're not stuck on deals, which is a big part of it. Look, there's no doubt the salaries are lower. Using the example of a 3-year lawyer, a New Zealand lawyer obtaining a 1-year PQE role, a Silver Circle role could be $50,000 less than a Magic Circle and $150,000 less than a US law firm. However, it's still great salaries compared to what most people are earning in New Zealand. And that sort of money will easily fund your lifestyle in the UK. I often tell lawyers the best way of looking at it is if you're earning, what are you earning New Zealand dollars is probably the minimum you'd be earning in the UK. So if you're on 60,000 New Zealand dollars, you're going to be on 60,000 pounds. And generally speaking, you just sort of double that. So you're on 120,000 New Zealand dollars. I just want to now sort of go on to visas. Obviously very important in terms of a move to the UK. It really depends on your age and your situation in terms of those visas. If you're very lucky enough to have a British passport, or you're lucky enough to get a Tier 1 ancestry visa because your parents or your grandmother was born in the UK, then you have unrestricted access to the market there. If you're securing a role from New Zealand, most law firms will obtain for you a Tier 2 working visa. They will sponsor you essentially and cover the cost of that visa and make all the arrangements. Those visas are valid up for 2 years, and if you're looking to stay beyond that, they will arrange indefinite leave to remain or extension of that visa. The other great thing about that is they're obviously paying for your relocation and your accommodation. The other option is the Tier 5 youth mobility visa. Often, look, clearly the most used visa for most New Zealanders going over there by a long way. This option is open to anyone up to 30 years old at time of arrival, I believe it is. Although this is going to increase to 35 at some point. This allows you to reside and work in the UK for up to 2 years with no restrictions on your employment. Now, most employers will look to sponsor you at some point during that 2 years and move you to a Tier 5 visa. So even if you're going over, you've secured a job and they want you to start soon, and they say, look, come across on the Tier 5, they will move you to a Tier 2 at some point. Or if you go across on the youth mobility, you're waiting to get a job there, they'll still hire you in a permanent position and look to transfer you across to maximize that visa period. So the UK firms are very experienced when it comes to visas. So it is a big part of it. But look, they will look after you from that point of view. In terms of qualification, for the vast majority of you don't need to become, England and Wales qualified. It's a relatively straightforward process to become requalified, but you can practice there as a full-on qualified lawyer very, very easily. Most firms will give you the option if you want to requalify. It's really up to you. Perhaps if you move in a house, if you're a contentious lawyer, you'd like to requalify, but generally speaking, it's not something you have to worry about until you move to the UK. That's all I want to cover about the UK. I just will move on to some other markets fairly quickly. The offshore market, a big unknown for most New Zealanders. But what it is, it's a great option, particularly if you're a litigator. In terms of locations, the most common destination for Kiwi lawyers is the Cayman Islands, which we're covering off there with that lovely picture, which is just off Miami. We also have the BVI, British Virgin Islands, which is in Bermuda. Bermuda is another one. Also, there is the islands of Jersey and Guernsey, which are between the UK and France. They're about a 30-minute flight to London or to Paris, depending on which way you're going. The offshore market is a great place for those seeking sun and surf and zero tax. The options offshore are generally banking and finance, corporate funds. A lot of commercial litigators go there, lawyers that have insolvency experience, lawyers that have restructuring or tax experience, or some fiduciary trust sort of work as well, as obviously you can secure roles there. A lot of the destinations you will need a minimum of 3 years work experience to be considered. And that is particularly so with the Cayman Islands and Bermuda. The Channel Islands is a little bit different. So that's Jersey and Guernsey. You can kind of move there with 1 or 2 years experience. It can be a really good option for New Zealanders looking for something a little bit different. Or it's a really good option to gain experience to get into the UK market. You could work in Jersey for Walkers for a couple of years, and a really renowned offshore firm that's going to open doors for you in London if you're trying to get there and focusing on your career. Look, as I said, that it's all tax-free there. They work extremely good working hours. It's very much a 9-to-5 culture, and the pay is extremely good, as you can see there. Now on to the Middle East, I should say. We do recruit and place lawyers throughout the UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, lesser extent Oman and Kuwait. Most expats tend to end up in Dubai or Abu Dhabi. That they're just the most western of those locations, which I'm sure you're aware of. The practice areas that are strong in Dubai and the Middle East are obviously the corporate functions, but also sort of your oil and gas, your projects, your power, your energy, anything sort of attached to infrastructure and energy. So if you have that experience, you'll find a great job in the UK. In the Middle East. They have, it is largely a tax-free environment. They have added GST to goods. So it's not completely tax-free, but your income tax is at 0%. Look, obviously, if you have Middle Eastern language skills, it's going to open a lot of doors for a non-language speaker from that perspective. Now on to sort of, I guess, a little bit closer to home and a location that I've worked and lived in for 10 years. I spent a year in Singapore and about 9 years in Hong Kong. Great places to live, and I'm pretty happy to say that Hong Kong is back open and transacting again after a long period of being closed for COVID. I think one of the issues with Asia is most people think you need Mandarin language skills. I'm going to say it's a huge advantage. But if you have a certain skill set, Singapore and Hong Kong are definitely open to you. Mainland China, you tend to probably do need the Mandarin language skills to get a position there, particularly at this stage. Both destinations are great to work in. They both have low taxes, about 12%. They're just an excellent environment to work in. If you have corporate, M&A, banking and finance, again, capital markets, employment, both markets are great for you. If you have that sort of mining and energy projects focus, I would highly recommend Singapore. It's a really compelling option to work on global high-profile global deals on the lender and sponsor side. Look, Singapore is also nice and close to home. It's pretty easy for trips to Australia and Bali and Thailand. And for both destinations, Europe's really only on one flight away. It's a 12-hour flight to New Zealand. It's a 12-hour flight to London. So you still get the best of both worlds in terms of living in Asia, but also getting to Europe. So I'll just go back one. Apologies. Last thing I really want to cover off the US. At the moment, Australian lawyers can move quite easily to the US. Unfortunately, New Zealanders don't have that option. They don't have the visa that Australian lawyers can. If you are a corporate or banking lawyer, look, there is a long-winded way of probably getting there by gaining experience in other markets first. But if you really are set on New York, please do let us know, and we can sort of help you out from that perspective. Look, in conclusion, there really is a wide array of options for you in terms of moving internationally. We would like to be your recruiter of choice. You've got two Kiwi lawyers here in terms of Sean and I. I have worked in a lot of those markets, so I know the ups and downs. I know what it's like to first land in London or Singapore or Hong Kong. I know where to live and what's the best places and things like that. So we're here to help you and hold your hand. We know this process is daunting. There's a lot of uncertainty in it as well. The process in terms of moving there can be long, and look, it's sometimes painful and daunting in itself. It can take anywhere between sort of 6 weeks to almost 6 months in terms of an interview process. Those processes have become more considered. What we normally do is speak to you about first of all, the locations, the certain suitable firms, and we'll make some selective approaches. Look, hopefully we arrange a few interviews there. In that process, you'll normally meet a couple of partners. Depending on the firm, there will be some testing by a knowledge management lawyer or one of the partners. There's normally another meeting with another selected group of partners before meeting a number of associates. So we are normally looking at sort of 3 or 4 rounds of interviews. Look, often, you'll be interviewing at multiple firms. The firms are all great at Teams now, and which makes it a lot easier in terms of the time zones and things like that. So most meetings tend to be at late evening New Zealand time, so those sort of swings sometimes early mornings as well. At the end of the day, if you're interested in getting there for summer and you want to be hitting Wimbledon or Glastonbury or the beaches of Ibiza, you kind of need to be looking now. If you're more interested in being there for the Rugby World Cup in Paris in October, you could probably wait a few months. What I would say is that we can look at it in tranches, and you can make applications now and be unsuccessful and have a look again in another 6 months. The other thing is, obviously, if you've got flight booked and you're definitely moving, what I would recommend is we kind of potentially manage that situation and try to get as many interviews face-to-face as opposed to Teams. It will go a long way to securing your position, but we can have a talk to you about your experience and really what is the best option for you from that perspective. So I'll just get onto some of these questions now. One of those questions is, what about private client and private wealth? Look, in the UK in particularly, there's a lot of private client firms. They tend to be more what we call West End firms. Where I work, Charles Russell Speechy is renowned as a private client firm. They deal with the Queen's lawyers, for instance, in terms of some of their private client work. Private wealth, it tends to be a lot more high end than what you in terms of what we would use in New Zealand. You talk about buying Chelsea Football Club and things like that. But look, there is a market there. You may need to probably go there yourself, to be honest, and look for a position, but there's definitely things there. The next question is, given the tightening market and there being lower demand, is it likely to attract packages such as relocation flights and accommodation repaid, particularly at the Silver Circle? Is this for the recruiter to fight for? Is this for the recruiter to fight for? Do we interview? Bring it up. If generally speaking, if they offer you the position when you're in New Zealand, they will pay for the relocation and your flights and the accommodation. Now, each firm often has a standard package. So some firms, that is economy flights for you and your partner. It may be an excess baggage. And it might be anywhere between 1 month or 2 weeks accommodation. The Silver Circle tend to do less on the accommodation side, to be perfectly honest. But that's something that we will definitely, on your behalf, fight for you and make sure you're trying to get the best deal from that sort of side of things. Some firms will give you even a sort of a 10K sign-on, which, to use for relocation. So that goes a long way. So it just sort of depends on the market from that perspective. What sort of grades are generally required? Look, it depends on the firm. It depends on the partner. I think, I feel that the world has moved on in terms of it only being about grades, and they look at everything else that goes with it. But there is a lot of partners that still want to look at grades, they will ask for your academic transcripts. That's sort of a standard in any market, and internationally, they will request those. The other question was, in applying for roles in Sydney, is there any factors that would make a candidate stand out? Look, I think, where you've trained, what practice areas, who you've trained under, ideally as much client interaction and transactional experience as you can. We could really help you, with your resume and beefing that out so it shows all your transactional experience from that perspective. Another question is that one of the lawyers, his wife is Canadian, and will there be a system obtaining her a work visa? They do have immigration specialists within those firms. It will really depend on her situation and skill set. The other thing to factor in is the potential of getting, depending on, I'm not aware of you. I'm sorry, she is your wife. Sorry, I missed that. Definitely, they will be able to get you a de facto visa, so that's no issue from that perspective. As long as you've got a visa, your wife will be able to live there as well, so no problem there. I've got a senior lawyer asking, what sort of PQE, is it too late to go offshore? Most offshore markets, it really depends on your practice and what you're bringing to the table to go offshore, to be perfectly honest. If you've got a really strong practice that will look internationally, like we obviously move senior counsels, we move partners between international locations. So it really depends on, I guess, your practice here. The visa is not an issue. It's more what you're bringing to the table from a practice point of view in terms of that. So that was the question about getting a visa offshore if you are a senior lawyer. What would my advice, this is a good one actually, what would be my advice to a lawyer, one-year PQE in a mid-tier firm that mainly does litigation and solvency work? How can they make the OE happen as soon as possible? Where would it be easiest to transition? Look, one of the issues at one-year PQE is, I think the UK market will be very, very difficult unless you want to go over there and for most of for the OE reasons. So you'll go over there, you may be able to get, you could potentially get a role that does doc review, which will pay sort of £35 an hour. You might be able to get a contract role. You could go and have a great time for a couple of years and then come back and focus on your legal career there. If it's all about, I guess, your legal career as well as your OE, first and foremost, I would probably recommend staying in New Zealand and trying to get as much insolvency experience as possible. The other option is, as I said earlier, is trying to take that step to Australia first and gaining a little bit more international experience, perhaps some arbitration experience before moving over there. But overall, probably more experience in New Zealand. So it just depends on, your circumstances from that perspective. Do we do much experience in recruiting lawyers into wider America, i.e. Canada? Is it possible for New Zealanders to get jobs here? Look, there it is. It's just very, very rare, to be honest. Canada, for instance, the white shoe firms there tend to focus on their own qualified from that perspective. So it's a much harder route. We do have some contacts there. And honestly, you may even be easier trying to get in there yourself with some of those firms in Canada. What about estates and trusts? Again, to gain a position from New Zealand can be very difficult. Look, I think it's more likely, if you're doing a lot of estates work, is that you probably need to go to the UK and look at some of the doc review, the paralegal work, or some of the contract work. If it's a lot of trust and you're doing a lot of fiduciary work, then that does open up options in terms of the offshore market and some of the roles in Australia. When it comes to next question is about older practitioners. Look, it really depends on the international market in terms of what your experience is and what you're bringing to the table. Look, obviously the UK has visa restrictions, and the ability to whether some they're going to sponsor you versus local lawyers that they will have in those positions. So it's not so much. It comes really back to what you bring to the table versus somebody locally. Is probably the best way of describing that one. The next question is, are there any opportunities for relationship, property, trust, litigation lawyers? Coming back to contentious and obviously or litigation, there's limited opportunities. I must admit, it really does diminish with that contentious skill set. Relationship, property, look, I would say there's some really good firms in the UK. It's the West End firms, some of the city firms that cover that off. The big problem is you were really going to struggle to get a position for you until you get to the UK. Again, your best bet is to book a flight, go over there, get it work. We can help you get an interim role there. We can help you get a doc review role to kind of make you ends meet, and then you can sort of start applying for those sort of roles and trying to get that in. It is going to be much harder than, say, a banking or corporate lawyer who can kind of walk into most roles over there. Again, it just depends what you're trying to get out of it and when you should be going over. The next question is, have we placed a financial services registry in a lawyer in the UK? And I definitely say we have. If so, what tips do you have for interviews, if any? I'm conscious it's very jurisdictional based and not sure how technical questions would be asked. That's a very, very fair question. Now, what I would say is most regulatory laws that are in the Commonwealth tend to flow from the UK back to New Zealand and back to Australia. So there is a tendency for those regulations to be slightly similar. Now, they're going to know and that you don't know anything about UK regulations. What you want to be doing is sort of looking at it in the context of New Zealand law and trying to figure out would that apply to the UK law. So that's my major tip there. I wouldn't say, look, this is what we do in New Zealand. I don't know what it works in New Zealand and UK. Anticipate if this was the law in New Zealand, this is how I think it would actually, although this is the law in New Zealand or the regulation in New Zealand, this is how I think it would apply in the UK. Obviously, some background homework as much as possible in terms of those differences in laws would go a long way. But look, financial services regulatory lawyers are definitely in demand in the UK. So, we've even moved FS regulatory lawyers into funds roles of the Magic Circle. That's how quite in demand they can be from that perspective. The next cute question is, does PQE begin from when you're admitted or when you started work? It's from the date you were treated as a lawyer or an associate. So generally speaking, that is the date of your admission. If you're working as a law clerk, they will take it from the day you became qualified as a lawyer. So I know some people will work 6-9 months. They will take that into consideration. However, when it comes to your PQE in the UK, so they might discount you by 1.5 because you've done 9 months in the same department as a law clerk. But generally speaking, PQE is from the date you were admitted in New Zealand. Now, what I should add to that, is that if you're admitted in New Zealand and then you don't start working for 3 to 6 months, then it would be the date you actually started work as a lawyer. So just to add on that. If you interview in person in London, would a relocation package still be on the cards? Or would you have to go through the full recruitment process in New Zealand to be eligible for relocation packages? You kind of need to be in the whole recruitment process in New Zealand. And look, one of the relocation packages is you've probably had a lot of colleagues in the last year or two that have got the full works, right? That have relocated to the UK. They've got sign-on bonuses. Some have been flown over business class. Generally speaking, that's not something that we often see. Most people will do perhaps an interview here and then fly over for the last round of interviews, and they're not reimbursed. Traditionally, there's, I guess a lot of law firms have been burnt by people coming over and paying for flights and staying for a month and then leaving and things like that. So it has been for the last 2 years a given that you'll get a relocation package, but generally speaking, like most lawyers don't get them from that sort of side of things. But look, I do know it makes a big difference in terms of heading over there and things like that. So I think that's all the questions. At the end of the day, look, Sean and I are available at any point to answer any more questions. Drop us an email, give us a call. We'll both be in New Zealand at some point soon, and we'd love to meet you and sort of discuss this all in person. We'll definitely be in Auckland and Wellington. I'll definitely be down in Wanaka during the ski season as well. So if you happen to be there, but look, thanks a lot for joining us. Look, we want to make your dream of an OE reality. So, do speak to us. We certainly know it's a tougher market, and it's just about eventually getting you there. And, we can talk about the best way of making that happen. But thank you again. Look, we'll be in touch. And again, if you've got any questions, please do reach out, and have a great evening. Cheers.